Once upon a time, there lived a man named Max. Max was a self-made millionaire, a man who had climbed the ladder of success with grit, cunning, and an unshakable belief in his power over people. His mansion stood tall in the heart of the city, surrounded by high walls and filled with the finest treasures from around the world. Max prided himself on his control over his businesses, control over his lavish lifestyle, and even control over the people who entered his life. To Max, people were like chess pieces, especially the women he dated. They were always beautiful, always eager to bask in his wealth and status. At one of his extravagant parties, his friend Fred, a fellow businessman known for his sharp wit and love of challenges, smirked and approached Max. "Max, you seem to have everything," Fred said, swirling his glass of champagne. "But I bet you can't marry a woman who isn't like the ones you're used to, someone who doesn't fit your world of glamour and vanity." Max raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what's the prize, Fred?" Fred chuckled. "$1 billion. But the catch is, you must stay married for 6 months to a woman of my choosing." "Always one for competition," Max agreed. To him, it was another game to win, another way to prove his dominance. A few days later, Max received the details of the woman he was to marry. Her name was Lucy, and she was nothing like the women Max was used to. Unlike the slender, glamorous women who paraded through his life, Lucy was viewed as unattractive by society's standards. She was larger in frame, and her appearance was often the subject of cruel gossip in her town. Many mocked her weight and called her ugly, words that had once stung deeply. As a young girl, Lucy had felt the sting of those taunts. People laughed at her when she passed and whispered behind her back. They called her names, criticized her appearance, and made her feel like she didn't belong. The constant mocking could have broken her spirit, but instead Lucy grew stronger. Rather than letting the hurt consume her, she developed a tough skin and vowed to never let anyone's opinions define her worth. Over time, she transformed from a shy, insecure girl into a strong, independent woman who knew her value didn't come from her looks. She focused on her education, her work, and her passions, and became a well-respected figure in her community. Lucy didn't seek validation from others. Instead, she made her own path, choosing dignity over societal approval. When Max first laid eyes on her at an upscale restaurant, he expected Lucy to be uncomfortable, perhaps even insecure in the lavish surroundings. But Lucy, dressed simply yet with elegance, walked into the luxurious setting with her head held high, completely at ease. Her large frame and the fullness of her figure were not hidden, but embraced in the graceful way she moved. "You must be Max," Lucy said, her voice firm and direct, her eyes meeting his without flinching. Max was taken aback, not by her appearance, but by the force of her presence. She wasn't the type to shrink under his gaze or be intimidated by his wealth. "And you must be Lucy," Max replied, extending his hand with a controlled smile. Lucy hesitated for a brief moment, as if deciding whether to acknowledge the formality, and then shook his hand with a grip that was as strong as her character. She wasn't here to play games. Without wasting time, Lucy leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady. "Let's not pretend, Max. I know about the bet. I know why we're here." Max, momentarily caught off guard by her bluntness, tried to mask his surprise. "And yet you agreed to meet me," he said, intrigued by her directness. Lucy's eyes softened, but her tone remained firm. "I have my reasons, but let me make one thing clear. If you think you can control or manipulate me because of this bet, you're mistaken. I've faced far worse than this, and I will not be another pawn in your game." Max couldn't help but admire her strength. Lucy was nothing like the women he had dated before. She didn't seem to care about his money, his status, or the luxurious lifestyle he offered. Instead, she was unmovable, grounded in her own sense of worth, and unwilling to be reduced by anyone's expectations, least of all his. Lucy wasted no time getting straight to the point. She placed her glass of wine down on the table, her gaze steady as she spoke. "If we're really going through with this, I want to make a few things clear," she began, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not interested in your money or your luxury lifestyle. 6 months is 6 months, and I plan on walking away from this exactly the same as I entered." Max watched her carefully. He could tell she wasn't bluffing. There was no pretense in her words. Lucy was the type of woman who knew what she wanted and wasn't going to be swayed by wealth or status. Unlike others who might see marriage to someone like Max as a way to climb the social ladder, Lucy saw it for what it was, a transaction, nothing more. "So what do you want, Lucy?" Max asked, genuinely curious. There was something about her that intrigued him, and he needed to understand her motives. "Freedom," she answered without hesitation, her eyes locked on his. "I want you to know that even though we're entering into this agreement, I won't be controlled by you. I have my own life, and that's not going to change because of a temporary marriage." Max smiled. It wasn't the answer he had expected, but it didn't bother him either. In his mind, marriage was just a formality, a technicality to win the bet. If Lucy wanted to keep her independence, he saw no reason to deny her that. After all, to him, this wasn't about building a relationship. It was about winning. "Fine," Max agreed, leaning back in his chair, his smile cool and composed. 6 months, and after that, we go our separate ways." Lucy watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable, as if she was assessing whether he truly meant it. She had accepted this challenge with a clear plan in mind, and she was determined to see it through on her own terms. Deep down, she knew Max might try to manipulate the situation, but she trusted her own strength. Max was just another obstacle, not someone who could bend her will. The meeting ended on friendly terms, both of them leaving with a clear understanding of their roles. Lucy would maintain her independence, and Max would make sure the marriage stayed a formality. But as the days passed and the wedding date approached, Max began to feel that perhaps this game wasn't as simple as he had imagined. The wedding itself took place in a cold, unceremonious manner, like a business contract being signed. There was no romance, no warmth, just a carefully orchestrated event. To Max, it was just another step toward claiming victory. But deep inside, a small part of him wondered if this would truly end the way he had planned. As days turned into weeks, Max found himself facing a new kind of challenge. Lucy was unlike anyone he had ever known. She was not swayed by the luxuries he offered, jewelry, trips to exclusive resorts, or the finest clothes. She had no interest in his material wealth. Instead, she remained focused on her work, living a simple but fulfilling life. Max began to feel frustration rising within him. Every woman he had ever met eventually succumbed to the allure of his lifestyle. But Lucy, she remained steadfast. She didn't care for his money, nor did she let him interfere in her life. She continued with her routine, working on causes that mattered to her and maintaining her independence. One evening, after another failed attempt to impress her, Max confronted Lucy. "Why are you so different from everyone else?" he asked, his voice a mix of frustration and genuine curiosity. Any other woman would jump at the chance to live this life. Lucy looked at him, her gaze soft but unyielding. That's where you're wrong, Max. I don't need your life. I have my own. Money doesn't define me, and it doesn't give you power over me. What I value is respect, respect for who I am and what I stand for. Max found himself thinking more and more about Lucy's words. For the first time in his life, he was beginning to question the foundation upon which he had built his identity. He had always believed that money and power could buy anything, even love and respect. But Lucy was showing him that there was a different kind of strength, one that didn't come from wealth, but from integrity, self-respect, and dignity. One night, after closing a long and exhausting day at work, Max found Lucy sitting on the couch, quietly reading a book. She was so absorbed in her reading that she seemed unaware of his presence. The silence between them, which had become their norm, weighed heavily on the room. For a moment, Max just stood there, watching her, feeling the tension that had grown between them over the past few months. "Can we talk?" Max finally asked, breaking the silence that had filled their home for too long. Lucy looked up, calm and composed. She closed her book deliberately, setting it aside with an almost serene expression. There was a look in her eyes as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. "Of course," she replied, her voice steady and attentive. Max sat down across from her, struggling to find the right words. The air between them was thick with unresolved tension, and Max knew he could no longer treat their marriage as a simple formality, a game to be won. Something had shifted, something deep, and he had to face it head on. "What are we doing here, Lucy?" he asked, the sincerity in his voice surprising even himself. "This started as a game, a bet, but now I don't know what to think anymore." Lucy stared at him for a few seconds, her gaze piercing. Then, in a calm voice filled with meaning, she said, "I'm not playing, Max. I never was." Her tone was clear, as if she were explaining something he should have already understood. "From the beginning, I accepted this marriage for reasons that go beyond you. I don't care about your money or your control over things. I'm here for something bigger, and if you haven't realized that by now, maybe it's time to open your eyes." Max felt a tightness in his chest, like a knot forming that he couldn't unravel. It was as if Lucy was revealing something hidden, a secret he hadn't figured out yet, and it frustrated him. He stood up suddenly, unable to sit still under the weight of her words. "I know you have your secrets, Lucy," Max said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "But the more I try to understand you, the more I realize I'm not in control, and I hate that." Lucy remained calm, watching his every move with an unwavering gaze. Slowly, she stood up and walked toward him, stopping just inches away. Max's heart raced as she looked up at him, her voice soft but firm. "Max, this isn't about control. You've lived your whole life trying to dominate everything and everyone. But with me, you'll have to learn that control isn't always the answer. Sometimes, things just need to be what they are." For the first time, Max looked into Lucy's eyes and felt something shift inside him. It was as though he was truly seeing her for the first time, not as a piece in his game or a challenge to conquer, but as a person with her own strength, her own story. "So, what do you want?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. Lucy smiled, a mysterious smile that sent chills down his spine. "I want you to figure that out for yourself, Max." The 6 months of their marriage were almost over, but for Max, each day felt like an eternity. He could hardly sleep, plagued by the feeling that he was on the verge of discovering something monumental. Lucy had become an enigma in his life, not just the woman he married on a bet, but someone who seemed to hold the key to something he couldn't grasp. Obsessed with understanding her, Max tried everything. He hired detectives, dug into her past, followed every possible lead, but it was as if Lucy was always 2 steps ahead, orchestrating everything from the very beginning. It gnawed at him, the realization that perhaps he had never been in control at all. One night, after returning from a late business meeting, Max entered his house to find Lucy standing by the large window, gazing out at the city like a queen surveying her empire. The room was bathed in quiet tension, the air heavy with the unspoken knowledge that something significant was about to unfold. Max felt the fear rise in his throat, tightening like a vice. He knew tonight would be the night she would reveal everything. Taking a deep breath, he approached her, his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the room. "I need answers, Lucy," he said, his voice firm, though his heart raced. "I can't take this game anymore. You have to tell me the truth." Lucy sighed deeply and turned to face him, her eyes now filled with an emotion Max couldn't quite decipher. There was something fierce in her gaze, something dark and powerful. "The truth, Max?" she said, a bitter smile crossing her lips as she folded her arms across her chest. "Do you really want the truth?" He nodded, though the tension in the room grew with each passing second, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Max braced himself, but nothing could have prepared him for what she was about to say. "You have no idea who I am," Lucy began, her voice as cold as a winter's wind. "You've always seen people as pawns on your chessboard, but this time, Max, you were the pawn. I've been playing this game from the start." A shiver ran down Max's spine as the certainty he had always felt, the belief that he was in control, began to crumble before her. He tried to speak, but Lucy didn't give him the chance. "Do you remember the name Mr. Obi?" she continued, her voice sharper now. "Of course you don't. People like you never remember. My father owned a small company, one that struggled to survive, until you came along and destroyed it." Max stepped back, his eyes wide with confusion as his mind raced, trying to connect the dots. What are you talking about?" he stammered. Lucy stepped closer, her eyes burning with anger and pain. "My father, Max, he was an honest man, working hard to support our family. Then you came along, and you took everything from him. He lost everything, and it led to his death." She paused, her voice breaking for a moment as tears welled up in her eyes. "My father started losing hope, thinking too much about our losses, and he got into a fatal accident, all because of your greed, your need for success at any cost." The impact of her words hit Max like a punch to the gut. He stood frozen, his mind flooded with memories of all the deals he had made, the contracts he had signed, the lives he had affected without a second thought. He couldn't remember every company he had crushed on his way to the top, but now, suddenly, it was all coming back to haunt him. "Lucy, I didn't know," Max stammered, desperate to explain himself, but she raised her hand, stopping him. "No!" she shouted, her anger boiling over. "You have no idea what you've done. It's not just about money, Max. It's about destroyed lives. You took my father from me, the only person I had in the world. While you thrived in your luxury, my mother and I sank into debt and despair. We barely had anything to eat while you lived your life in comfort." Max was speechless, unable to defend himself, as the weight of her words crushed him. All he could do was stand there, guilt pressing down on his chest like a heavy stone. "But I planned everything," Lucy continued, her tone now more controlled, but still filled with resentment. "I was there when your friends made that bet, joking about women like me. That's when I knew I had to act. I took the opportunity, Max, because I wanted you to feel just a fraction of what I felt. I wanted you to know what it's like to be played, manipulated, and left powerless. Max trembled, his mind reeling. He had always thought he was in control, always believed he would come out victorious. But now the tables had turned. He was the target, and Lucy had been playing him from the very beginning. Lucy, I didn't know you were, Max began, but his voice was weak, barely audible. No, you never knew, because you never cared, Lucy interrupted, stepping closer until she was face to face with him. You destroyed lives without a second thought, and now I'm here not to destroy you, but to make sure you never forget what you did. I want you to feel the pain, Max, the pain you caused, and that pain will haunt you for the rest of your life. Her words fell over him like a sentence. Max, for the first time in his life, was confronted with the real consequences of his actions. The weight of guilt was crushing, and in that moment, he realized he had lost much more than a simple bet. He had lost something he could never get back. Lucy stepped away, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the mansion. Max collapsed onto the couch, speechless, as the reality of everything he had done sank in. All that remained was emptiness. As the 6 months drew to a close, Max realized that he didn't want the marriage to end. He had fallen in love with Lucy, not the woman he thought she was, but the woman she truly was. He had come to respect her independence, her strength, and her unwavering sense of self. One evening, as they sat together, Max took Lucy's hand. I don't want this to end, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. I've fallen in love with you, Lucy, not because of the bet, but because of who you are. Lucy smiled, her eyes softening. I've seen you change, Max. You're not the same man you were when we first met, but love isn't something you can win, like a prize. It has to be earned, and it has to be real. Max nodded, understanding the truth in her words. I'm willing to earn it, Lucy. No more games, no more bets, just us. Their relationship deepened, built on mutual respect and genuine love. Max had finally learned that true wealth wasn't measured in money or power, but in the strength of character and the bonds of love and respect. The bet had brought them together, but it was something much deeper that kept them there. Max had found something more valuable than money. He had found a life worth living with a woman he truly respected and loved.